No. You got it. Oh, you're so close. Yeah, you're so good. Oh, this is easy. Oh, please.
That's not really Stuart, you know, just because
And the loudest one and demanding people.
yeah. Alright. I'll draft it too, so they just have to like
Yeah,
sign.
it's like we all just got rainy and nasty. It's supposed to stop raining by now.
Thank goodness.
Do you have a chair? No. I feel like there was an extra chair.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Yes.
Oh, yes. Everybody's delayed today.
And the weather is just making it even worse. Yeah, yes, I heard. Turn it off now. Thank you for the reminder, Mark, because knowing my voice is loud enough where everyone can hear me without the mic. Anything I say, it'll be fine.
Okay. I'm going to call the May 30th, 2024 meeting of the Barnstable Local Comprehensive Planning Committee to order. In accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the committee must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. Seeing none, we'll move to the first item on our agenda, which is approval of the minutes from the May 19th, 2024 meeting. Any discussion? Everyone had a chance to look at them? Changes? I'll take a motion. A second?
Second.
Any further discussion on the minutes? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Anyone here to speak to the committee? Come on down, state your name.
Hi, Roberta Mock, 80 Greenwood Ave, Hyannis. Thank you for this opportunity. I just want to say that we're living in challenging times, and we all need to get involved in making wise decisions because the decisions made in this room affect us all. My concern is as we face the challenges that we have, that we don't throw the baby out with the water. And what I'm saying is the historic nature and character of our community. It's very important that we don't. I have a tendency to not care for mega projects that where historical buildings are torn down so a mega complex can be put in place. Especially in inflationary times, developers are going to try to spend less money on the facade because it's very expensive. I am of the mind that I'd like to preserve open space. People like to have the Cape for recreation. It is a vacation destination. It's a retirement destination. More and more young people want to be outdoors, doing outdoor activities. Let's try to keep the character of our community as we face the challenges of housing and the growth of our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else here care to speak to public comment? Any response to public comment? Asia, you have the floor.
So thank you, Roberta, for speaking. I really appreciate that. I do want to say that as someone who sits on this committee, I hear you, but we desperately need housing. We've heard over and over and over that we need housing. Our community, particularly Hyannis, is very diverse. More than 30% of our community are immigrants. So if we're talking about culture and character, we need to talk about their culture and character too. So not every building is going to be kept that is older and historic. A lot of these buildings are sitting on land that could be used for housing that is in the growth incentive zone. So my belief personally is that We need to build up in our growth incentive zone where we have the sewers, particularly the TD Bank building and other buildings are desperately needed. I am in support of those projects, and I just wanted to make my viewpoint very clear.
Thank
That
you.
we need the housing desperately. We can keep some charm on the Cape, but we have to think of all races, all demographics. The Cape Cod charm that some people may be discussing does not represent the immigrant communities or people of color with the particular designs of the TD Bank. There's nothing, in my opinion, that's attractive about that building. It's the ugly old bank, and I think that it needs to be turned into housing right now.
Mark?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for your comment. I thought it was thoughtful in that, and if I could speak a little more personally here. So we are in the business of putting up housing, and I do agree that keeping the character is something that we've tried to do. We are in our third iteration of a facade that we're working. It's a smaller project, but we found ourselves traveling 6A. Some of the more historical areas, and love the look of what we're trying to do. And you're right, it is expensive to create facades that are a little more, say, historical or keeps the character. I do think on street side, certainly on these projects, it's worth it. And again, we're not trying to mimic 100% historical, but I think to bring in some elements of it is something that we're trying to do. With regard to some of the bigger projects, I also, agree to somewhat to the extent that, the larger projects, they have their place. I think downtown, especially just like many successful retail outlets, that you do need some anchor stores, and in this case, some anchor developments. It doesn't have to be a lot of them, but it does drive investment in the area. And I think to be able to infill maybe with some of the some things that look a little more historical, developers that take a little more time to just look at the facades, maybe lead by example, really is what we're trying to do. So I think it's well thought out, and I do think there is some thought going into some of the projects that are happening now. I've seen a few that have been maintained, re-shingled, just updating them, making them look nicer. But thank you for your comment. Appreciate it.
Katia?
Thank you for your comments, and I appreciate when you said the necessity. I feel that you keep the character of Cape Cod. As an immigrant, I love the city. It's beautiful. And yes, we need housing, we need changes, but we can't just ignore this because we want open space. I am from a country where I grew up running my kids, and I want the same for my daughter. So yes, we are working and keeping all this. Yes, we have to be thoughtful, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Francis.
I just wanted to say that this is not the first time we've had a lot of people from different backgrounds in different countries come to Cape Cod. This is, we've had the Cape Verdeans, the Portuguese. I grew up with Finnish people, Norwegian people, Scandinavian people. And so, we've always had an integrated community on the Cape. I think, I know you want that wind building, but that, I'm sorry, it's just completely inappropriate for downtown Hyannis. If they could figure out some way to make it look better, possibly, but it's just too overwhelming for Main Street Hyannis. And I don't think the infrastructure of Hyannis is going to support it. Do we need housing? Yes, we need housing. But I think there are multiple other things that can be done. One thing would be done is to get rid of short-term rentals. That's the big problem. That took away the rental housing. And, I grew up here, got out of high school, became an x-ray technician, came back, worked at Cape Cod Hospital, and I certainly wasn't going to go home to live. So I had some roommates, and we played the summer-winter game. You find a winter rental, and then you have to find a summer rental. So I understand that. But I think in terms of Main Street Hyannis, you have to be very careful what you do to it, because that's going to be a major economic driver for for the town. And unfortunately, it was devastated when the mall was built.
Right. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, we'll move to the main part of our agenda, and we have Kate Maldonado here to guide us through.
Good evening, thank you. Kate Maldonado, Senior Planner, Planning and Development. Tonight, we're going to build on the great efforts and discussions that we had at the last meeting to continue our discussion on economic development. Very fortunate this evening to have Paul Niedzwiecki, the Chief Executive Officer of the Cape Cod Commission Chamber of Commerce, here to provide more insight for economic development on a broader, more regional level, talking about issues, opportunities, as well as best practices related to economic development. So we'll hear from Paul tonight, and then afterwards, we'll break out into groups. We'll continue the similar teams that we had at the previous meeting because we got through a portion of the boards, but not all of them. So we'll start with the boards that both groups didn't get to. And then as time permits, we can look at some of the boards that we did work on if there's further insight or further comments. That being said, you have the draft chapter, the economic development chapter. It's included with your meeting material. So if you have further comments, please always submit to staff any comments that you have on the chapter as a whole, as well as those specific goals. Looking forward to the month of June, we will dedicate the month of June to the next chapter, that's culture, heritage, and design. We're only going to meet once during the month of June on the fourth Thursday of the month. To keep us on schedule, what we're going to do is we are going to actually record our subject expert presentations. Those are being recorded early next week, so we're going to hear from Bob Frazee, who is one of the members of the Historical Commission on Culture and Heritage, and then Melissa Chartrand from our Planning and Development Office on Culture, arts and culture. So those recordings will be available to you as well as to the greater public. They'll be posted on the website well in advance of your meeting at the end of the month so that you'll have the opportunity to listen into the insight that the experts are providing on those topics before we dive into the goals at the end of the month. We have results from several of the survey questions posted online, so natural resources as well as infrastructure. We're keeping the format on the document library where it's organized by chapter and just building and continuing to put more and more resources as they're achieved on that website so that the committee as well as member of the public can see those results. And right now, we just published a survey question for priorities related to economic development. So I'll send out the direct link to the committee, and that is continued to be published on the LCP website on the homepage. So we appreciate your help to promote that question and get some more engagement from the community. And it'll also be distributed on social media consistent with the prior questions. So after the presentation, we'll break out into our teams again to look at goals and strategies for economic development. And with that, I'll take any questions or comments before we proceed to the presentation.
I think we're all set.
Okay, let me switch up the PowerPoint.
Ready? Good evening. My name is Paul Niedzwiecki. Happy to be with you here tonight. Just a little background on me. I'm a lawyer by training. I've been involved with sort of planning and regulatory matters on the Cape for over 25 years now. Was a staff member in the House of Representatives for the Barnstable representative, then chief of staff for the Cape and Islands. Did 3 years as the assistant town manager here, and then 10 years at the Cape Cod Commission before going to the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be there 3 years in July. So I think tonight, what I'd like to do is to provide kind of a regional context for economic discussions and local comprehensive planning discussions, and then talk a little bit about the blue economy and the importance of tourism. And I think that'll help us have a more specific discussion about Barnstable in particular. So if we look at the Cape Cod economy, I'm going to use some slides from my friends at the Cape Cod Commission because they do such a great job over there, and we also like to make sure we're using the same numbers when we talk about things. So year-round residents, 229,000 people. The percentage of the population not identifying as white definitely increasing through the 2020 census. 34% of the population 65 years and older, so we are an older population. If you look at the median age, Massachusetts 55.7, in the Commonwealth 40, and nationwide 39. 80% of the homes are detached single-family homes. We have this monoculture of single-family homes, not a lot of diversity in the housing stock, and that is understandable given the seasonal nature of the economy, but it presents some real issues from a planning and development perspective. Over 500 miles of coastline, 27,000 acres in the Cape Cod National Seashore. 86% of Cape Cod is already either protected or developed. So, when we talk about a housing crisis and things like that, we're not New Mexico, right? So we don't have a lot of additional land that we can build on. And then just looking at the economy overall, on average, the region employs about 85,000 people year-round, and that peaks in the summer and goes up to about 112,000 people that are employed here. We have over 5 million visitors annually. In the summers of 2021 and 22 were sort of banner seasons for the Cape. Even though travel and tourism was the #1 impacted industry nationwide, on the Cape we did really well, and I think it's important to recognize why we did well. We are not a resort community, we're a second homeowner community. 37% of the housing stock on the Cape are second homes. So what draws people to the Cape? We do a series of studies around these things, both at the Chamber and the Commission does their own. We come up with the same answers all the time. Access to the coast, it's the coastline, it's the waterfront. Outdoor recreational opportunities, environmental quality. That's why people come to visit the Cape. That's why a lot of people have moved here. So we do have key regional challenges that are presenting themselves. Climate change, with that much coastline, we're going to be impacted first by sea level rise and more frequent and severe storms. Housing, water quality, and infrastructure generally, these are all economic issues, whether you're talking about wastewater or whether you're talking about replacing the 2 bridges, right? These are all economic issues that we need to take into account. On the climate side, I don't think we have to spend too much time talking about the rising temperatures and the rising seas. I mean, we've already seen 3 inches of sea level rise in Boston since 2000. And the reason sea level rise in particular and some of these coastal storms are important for the Cape really has to do with your property tax base. It's Proposition 2.5, the town's gonna collect the same amount of money every year. It's just gonna be apportioned differently based on the value of the property. If climate change hits and you start to see those coastal properties declining in value, that tax burden shifts to those who can least afford it, right? So it is an economic issue. Expected losses for low-lying roads, over $50 billion is anticipated throughout the next 100 years. And then we'll talk about housing a little bit, rising prices and declining inventory. So what you see there are the rising prices from June 2019 through June 2023. So single-family home median value in 2019 was $449,000. It's now $730,000. The inventory, the number of homes that were available for sale in 2019, on average 2,090. In June 2023, 400. So the housing issue has always been here. When you have that much coastline, that much coastal property, our property values on the Cape are higher than the state average. But because of the seasonal economy and the service nature of that, our wages are below average, right? So there's always been an affordability issue, but the pandemic really sort of put that on steroids. We saw a fairly significant COVID-19 population shift. So people buying second homes here. A lot of those second homes were used as year-round rentals and are no longer available, and those people have been displaced. So housing costs clearly are too high. You have to be a family making $46,000 on the rental side. These are statewide averages. But on the Cape, you need $210,000 a year as a family to even think about getting into the housing market. You can potentially qualify for subsidized housing as a family making up to $80,000 if you can find the subsidized housing. But in between 80 and 210,000, that's everybody I know. And that's the missing middle. And that's the housing piece that we need. That's where the nurses and the firefighters, the teachers are all live in that space. And there's not a lot of public money to subsidize housing in that area. And the wages clearly are not keeping up. Housing prices increasing by 64%. Average weekly wages at the same time period, only 24% of an increase. So the housing supply is insufficient now. So we have to look at what we want to do about the housing crisis. And we can't simply build our way out of it, right? We don't have the space to do it even if we wanted to. But we have to deal with it somehow. And this 37% of the housing stock that are second homes, that's really the issue. That's what makes the housing challenge on the hit differently on the Cape than it does in other parts of the state and other parts of the country. So I think when we start to think about solutions to the housing challenge, that's really the key that we have to keep in mind, those 37% are second homeowners. So if we just build a lot of new housing, there's no guarantee that they won't be purchased by second homeowners, right? So, housing strategies that allow maybe buying deed restrictions for year-round residents or allowing enough density so that the HOA that runs the property has restrictions so you can't sublease for less than 6 months, which some properties, developments in Mashpee already have in place. Those are ways and strategies to protect housing for year-round residents. And that really is a priority for the Chamber. And we talk about the blue economy at the Chamber, and the history of Cape Cod's economy relates directly to the surrounding bodies of water, right? And so when we think about economic development at the Chamber and on the Cape, we want to know, what do we have that's a competitive advantage to other parts of the state? And it really is our connection to the water, and it's been that way for thousands of years, if you really want to consider that. So just to give a sense of the blue economy, I don't know if I can get this to play. There we go.
Taken 6 million miles away, Carl Sagan referred to our Earth and home as the pale blue dot.
Yeah,
blue is a color that not only surrounds us,
but this is a little video we have on our website that really
Zooming
explains
into
the blue economy.
region, water drives the economy.
It gives a better
Everywhere you
explanation
look, you see the
than
blue
kind of the
economy, from
vagaries
oyster farms in Cape
that
Cod
come up
Bay
in
and
some of
commercial
the
fishing
public
fleets in
discussions we
Plymouth,
have.
Chatham, Menemsha,
But we
and
have invested a
Provincetown,
lot
to
of
the
time
ferries
in the
in
blue
Hyannis,
economy at
the
the Chamber and
boatyards at
developing that and
Castleton,
developing
and
aspects of the
groundbreaking
blue economy like
scientific
fishing and
exploration and
aquaculture
innovation in Woods Hole.
and renewable energy, where we do have an advantage over other areas like southeastern Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Boston, Gloucester, that are also heavily invested in sort of the blue economy. This is just a snapshot of we have an economic development dashboard that we keep on the website now. And this shows you some of the major industries, all of which are blue or touch blue. But now, really, the tourism economy really runs the Cape. The Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce is 102 years old. So we were formed back in 1920, 21, 22. When we were emerging from another pandemic, the Spanish flu, when we were seeing traditional industries like fishing, farming, whaling fail. And the question was, what's going to happen to the Cape? So community leaders got together. They decided they needed one organization that was going to advocate that Cape Cod is a great place to come and visit. And we started our path on travel and tourism then, over 100 years ago, and we're still on that path today. So the tourism economy, it really shapes the Cape's regional identity, the economy and the daily lives of residents and business owners. And at the Chamber, we're always looking at how we can leverage tourism activity to help businesses succeed, looking at data points primarily. So who visits Cape Cod? What do they do when they're here? How long do they stay? How much money do they spend? And does that activity vary by season? And any other opportunities to collect data so that we can understand the seasonal nature of the economy on the Cape. Some of the tourism economy indicators we look at are lodging occupancy. And that's an interesting one and becoming more interesting because we are actually losing traditional hotel rooms on the Cape. The traditional lodging industries, hotels and motels, we're losing rooms. Some of those motels are being converted into housing, for example. But we have over 18,000 short-term rentals on Cape Cod now, which is more than New York City. And so that's an issue. And those short-term rentals are single-family homes that are in neighborhoods that are on Title V systems, right? So, protecting that traditional lodging industry becomes a real important focus for the chamber moving forward. We also look at average daily rate, lodging supply and demand, visitor spending, business feedback that we get with our annual surveys, rooms and meals tax, always a good indication of how well we're doing on the revenue side, and short-term rental registration. So I said 18,000, that's up 2,000 from a year and a half ago. So the percentage of the housing stock on the Cape that are second homes, that 37%, that's remained fairly consistent. But with the advent of Airbnb, VRBO, We Need a Vacation, those homes are not empty as often as they used to be, especially in July and August. So Cape Cod tourism's impact, visitation and spending, like I said, 5 million visitors a year. It's a $69 billion industry statewide, and we generate over $181 million in state and local tax receipts just from Cape Cod. So we are a profit center for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We generate more tax revenue for the state than we get back in unrestricted local aid. So Cape Cod tourism impact on the labor and workforce side. Employment on Cape Cod increases by an average of 33% from winter to summer. That's at 85,000 to 112,000. 12,000 jobs directly related to tourism, and 4 out of the 5 top industries on Cape Cod are directly linked to tourism and the second homeowner economy. And so just to close with sort of a recap of the 2023 summer. As I mentioned earlier, the summer 2021 and 2022 were banner years for us. The best, really, that we've ever had from an economic output perspective as it relates to travel and tourism. 2023 was the first real return to normal year that we looked at. And a lot of the traditional lodging organizations, hospitality, expected a drop-off in occupancy of between 15 and 20% compared to the summer of 2022. We didn't see that. We saw a drop-off in July and August of less than 2%, while the islands saw a drop-off of over 10%, right? So that speaks to the resiliency of the tourism economy. When you look at the scale and the scope of the hospitality industry that we have on the Cape compared to the islands, we were able to weather that better. We were able to adjust prices more quickly. So 2023 was still good. And the data reflects that resiliency and the growth in the tourism economy. The shoulder season months continue to see growth. We're seeing a rounding out. So June and September are very strong months for us now. And the peak months of July and August, as I mentioned, just saw that slight decrease. So if we look at traditional occupancy, lodging occupancy, you can see that darker line is that 2023 year with those rounder shoulders and compared to the peaks that we saw in 2019 and 2021. Short-term rental occupancy, so this is overlaid on that 18,000 short-term rental number Cape-wide. It's increasing. We're seeing a little bit of a dip in August. That might be due in part to the average daily rates, which have just skyrocketed. The Cape is a place in a tourism economy that really made that economy with middle-class people that used to be able to throw their kids in the back of a station wagon, drive across the bridge, and look for a vacancy sign at a motel, right? That economic paradigm has sailed. But that's how we kind of made our bones, as an affordable drive-to kind of location. That's changing. We're seeing more international travelers visit here. We're seeing more people that fly in to Boston or Providence and drive to the Cape. So things have really changed. Short-term rental market growth, just to put an exclamation point on that, you can see in 2021, these are registered properties. We had a little over 12,000. Now it's almost 18,000. So short-term rental registrations have grown by 46, almost 47% since 2021. And so we looked at a case study because I like data. So we looked at a case study for Memorial Day last year. And we looked at visitor spending, which was up 133% compared to the 4 weeks prior to that, to show you that spike and how that starts. Most of the spending was on restaurant, nightlife, gas stations, people still driving here, and outdoor recreation, again, still the biggest draw. And so one of the things that we have, we work with a company called Zartico, and so they give us these kind of dynamic maps. And so this is information that's, some of it's scraped from the internet, some of it is credit card data that records spending activity. It's all anonymous, and part of the other part is cell phone usage, so we can tell where people are, where they come from. So the red dots that you see up there are out-of-state visitors. The blue dots are in-state visitors, and sort of the greenish dots are residents. And so this is a time lapse of Memorial Day weekend last year, and you can see how busy we get on Memorial Day weekend. A lot of good data there. So 2024 tourism forecast, labor supply is still the biggest issue on the Cape with most employers. So it's top challenge, but it's not really labor supply, it's housing, right? That's the real issue. We talk about labor supply time, but it's housing and childcare. Those are the two big impediments to bringing the people here that we need to support both the seasonal and the year-round economy. Infrastructure improvements, the Cape Cod Bridge replacement, both of those bridges are almost 100 years old, approaching 100 years old. There isn't infrastructure in the country that carries that many trips. They were built to accommodate 1 million trips a year. They see 38 million trips a year now, which is the equivalent of a Golden Gate Bridge. So those are not insignificant structures. They're 100 years old. If we look at what happened in Providence with the bridge there, or the Key Bridge, you can see how vulnerable these local, bigger, like urban economies are when you see infrastructure like bridges fail. Wastewater infrastructure is clearly a need. But the good news on that is that the towns are moving, right? We created in 2018 a Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund to provide a 25% subsidy to towns in their wastewater improvements. And that fund was initially set up to handle about $80 million of projects annually. Last year, they had over $500 million in projects apply to the fund for reimbursement and on the IUP. So that's good news. We're moving forward on the wastewater side, but we have a lot of other infrastructure challenges that are going to follow that. And we're also seeing increased competition from the tourism sector, from other parts of the state and other parts of the country. So trends and opportunities in 2024, looking at a tourism forecast, the pandemic population growth is holding strong. You can tell that by still the sort of complete lack of inventory we have on the housing side. The resilience of the Cape as a top-tier destination is strong. Tourism sector forecasting towards outdoor experiences and family-oriented travel remains strong. The loss of traditional lodging capacity is an issue that we have to watch, and the sustained growth in short-term rental market also an issue that we have to watch. So what we're seeing is a leveling out of seasonal activity, that shoulder season growth in occupancy and average daily rate. Larger resorts like the Quasit Inn in Harwich, Chatham Bars Inn are year-round now, so that we're seeing more year-round activity. We're especially busy through the holiday season. And we see the increased demand for holiday events and attractions. And just to point that out, this is sort of a static shot of the same Zartico information that shows you Memorial Day weekend 2023 compared to the first weekend in December in 2023. So the only difference is most of the traffic, a lot more of it in December are locals that are doing the holiday stuff. But incredibly important and an opportunity to bring more people here to celebrate that. The Gardens Aglow Festival at Heritage Museum and Gardens, for example, sells out the day they put those tickets on sale. And this is another aspect of the data that we can look at, so we can see where people are coming from. So looking at the case study in December, the 2nd and 3rd of last year, the sort of blue lines will show you where people are coming from and going to. So those are local people. That giant red line from Logan Airport lands in Mashpee Commons. So it gives us a good sense of the kind of economic activity that's happening and when, how much of it is local and how much of it is out of state. So state of the Cape Cod tourism economy, it is resilient. We're seeing a return of international travel and increased spending from Competing destinations means we have to do more to that. We're at a convention in Los Angeles, the IPW, 2 weeks ago, looking at international travel issues. And we do have the building blocks for more of a year-round economy. The opportunity for economic growth on the Cape is in the shoulder seasons. We don't need more people here in July and August, right? But you have to remember, all the infrastructure that we build for peak flow season, whether it's wastewater or transportation. So we're overbuilding infrastructure on the Cape. And that puts an inordinate burden on year-round residents, quite frankly. So by rounding out the shoulder seasons, getting more economic activity during shoulder seasons, we don't have to build new infrastructure. We don't have to build new hotel rooms. We just have to fill up the empty ones that we have. So it is a short path to a more sustainable kind of economic development. What we're working on in 2024, we're continuing to help our hospitality and tourism businesses succeed, advocating for critical investments in infrastructure. We just put together Cape and Islands Bridge Coalition that's been lobbying the federal government for the money to replace those bridges. We're hopeful to hear good news on Sagamore in the next month. And then we are identifying opportunities to facilitate that year-round economic activity. And that is my presentation that hopefully gives you a sense of the region, the Cape, the focus on the blue economy and some of what we're trying to do there, and what we're doing with tourism and how important that is. So with that, I think we should probably open up to questions. That probably would be the
Sure.
best way to proceed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was very, very interesting stuff. And members, sure.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Thank you for this. It's interesting, a lot of data. I have kind of three questions that are related. And the first is you talk about short-term rentals being at whatever it is, 18,000.
Yeah.
And then you said something, those are the registered
Yes.
short-term rentals. So do we know that they're all registered?
No.
So there's probably a lot more.
Yes.
So first of all, secondly, you talked about the hotels not being kind of the places that we know or we remember, and if that is the case, hopefully they are really turning into housing. I don't know that I've seen that so much, but I miss a lot. So
Yeah, they're just on that. Some of the larger hotels on the Lower Cape in particular have actually purchased smaller hotels just to house their workforce, right? So that's an example of losing rooms to be able to house your labor supply. But those are 4- and 5-star resorts that are doing that. You get some of the smaller hotels can't afford to do that kind of project. And there are other projects that haven't been built yet that are under consideration where hotels have sold and there are housing proposals coming forward.
And lastly, there was one thing you said kind of near the end, which I question a little bit, where you said that that the COVID, the people who bought during COVID seem to be sticking around. But
Yeah.
my understanding is that they aren't sticking around quite so much. In fact, that's part of the reason there's an increase in short-term rentals, because they're putting their houses on the market.
Yes, I think
that
we're
way.
saying the same thing. So they haven't sold the properties, but those that may have anticipated to live more on the Cape and work remotely, that hasn't turned out to be a reality for everybody. A lot of companies are requiring people to come back to work, but they haven't sold the properties. What they have done is rented them out as short-term rentals.
So lastly, if we looked, I guess Nantucket banned short-term rentals or some version of that. I'm not totally clear on that. If there's a movement to do that here, which I hear sometimes from people, what in your mind, what would be the outcome of that? And now I'm done.
Outlawing short-term, I think you have a hard time outlawing short-term rentals. I think there are significant legal challenges to that going forward. But the Nantucket decision is one to watch as it works its way through the appellate process, because the basic premise that they're saying over there is that it's a business activity in a residential neighborhood. And most of the laws that are now attached to short-term rentals weren't designed for short-term rentals. So that's definitely something that we've got to work out moving forward. But, you know, and other parts of the country have tried to deal with this too. And where you deal with this kind of Jersey barrier, like you shall not kind of thing, generally they find ways around that or there are legal challenges. What interests me as a way to deal with short-term rentals is to use tax policy. You know, if you can increase sort of a local option tax on short-term rentals, so the town gets money from that short-term rental activity, and the percentage additional you're charging actually provides a disincentive a little bit, so it moderates the market, generates income that then you can use to address the problems that are created by the short-term housing. So I think I mean, that's...
Sandwich did that.
Yeah,
recently.
It probably doesn't sound great, but I would encourage people to look at potential tax policy in order to do that. The one thing the short-term rentals are doing is that Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund that I talked about generates over $20 million a year. About 60% of that comes from short-term rentals.
Ooh.
So that significant 25% subsidy for wastewater is tied to short-term rentals. So if we could just wave a wand and get rid of them all tomorrow, that might not be a great thing. But, you know, I think it's clear we have to look at the impacts that they're having on neighborhoods. And I think looking at tax policy is probably the best way to deal with it. But that's just my opinion.
All right, just as one thing, there are ways that these short-term rentals can be tracked. They have different methods through electronic means, so towns are doing that. And they can get that on the books. Anyone else? Sure, Kathy.
Thank you for the fantastic explanation and so clarify so much about Cape that I've been here for 20 years, but didn't know much of this. It's beautiful, amazing. So when we are working, it's exciting what the news you brought that for immigrants, that it is the majority of the workforce of Cape Cod. We really, it's exciting to think that you are thinking that we should think about like a sustainable way to live, because if we are working, preparing the city for 3 months, have this all water and everything for 3 months, and we have the burden that most of us doesn't have the money to sustain this whole thing, and look, bigger way that we would have money coming in all year round. That's what we want. And I think I just want to say thank you for the vision, and this is what we're looking for.
Well, thank you. And just on the immigrant issue, our seasonal economy is dependent on foreign-born workers, people that are here on J-1 visas and H-2B visas. And just an example of that, in 2018, we had 5,000 J-1 visas on the Cape supporting the seasonal economy. There are only 6,000 in the state, and there are only 100,000 in the country. So that should tell you how crucially important those J-1 student visas and that cultural exchange program is. Now, during the pandemic, it dropped down to 300 in 2020. It only rebounded to 2,100 in 2021 because the sponsoring agencies were now requiring employees to provide housing, right? So it all comes back to the same issue, housing. We brought on sort of at the chamber someone to work with people to amplify the host network. And so we're back, this year we're going to be around 3,900, so we're getting back to where we are. But the seasonal economy doesn't run without foreign-born workers. And I think what was said earlier, the history of immigration on the Cape and immigrant contributions to communities is significant. I mean, when I was the assistant town manager, I think one of the proudest moments we had in this room was when we purchased the Zion Union Museum over on North Street. So much Cape Verdean history that was just sort of wasting away in people's basements and attics. And we need to lean into that more. There's a huge Brazilian population, as you know, in Barnstable, and there's a big Jamaican population on the Outer Cape, and a lot of them work as home health aides. And they're such an important part of this community, and it's not new. It's not new at all.
Mark?
Yeah, and if I could maybe piggyback on your former, so just based on your numbers, it looked like there was about a 26,000 person rise in the peak season of workers required. In your experience or in your investigation, are other communities adopting like a dormitory style housing zoning? Are you a proponent of that? Do you think it should be included in zoning? Or do you think there's a place for something like that?
Yeah, I think it should be included in zoning. I think if it's not, you're sort of ignoring the elephant in the room, that we are a seasonal economy and that we have to fluctuate and provide temporary housing for the seasonal workforce. And I do think you look across the Cape, you have a number of, underperforming hotel motel properties that would be appropriate for this. Some communities, I know Eastham has a hotel motel conversion bylaw that they've passed. So you're seeing a move in that direction. And I would encourage people to take a look at that.
And do you think that because the U.S. has a very strong dollar right now, I mean, do you think if that were to ever shift, we would see a stronger, back to local type of travel? I mean, I'm assuming after COVID, a lot of people, went to foreign travel just based on the fact that, we have such a strong exchange rate outside of the country.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is dependent, but a lot of it is pent up from the pandemic too. So the reason we saw such banner years in 21 and 22 is because people could drive here and there were still international restrictions on travel. Once those international restrictions opened up, if you read articles from Spain or Italy last year, they were complaining that they were overrun with tourists. So we've seen that. And given the sort of the demand that was demonstrated in 21, 22, we saw huge jumps in average daily rates, right? So, a week at the Chatham Bars Inn isn't that much less expensive than a week in Italy now. So we're starting to see some of these things level out.
Yeah, and just one more question. So I think there's always a general discussion about what we would deem affordable housing, or the term gets thrown around a lot. But just in my own research, and I don't know if you're finding the same, I'd be curious, that I don't think we're ignoring, but that it's really the missing middle, that 80 to 200% of the median income that we're really missing here hard. People that are really, you can get into that number pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where the chamber is focused. I mean, we're part of a larger Housing to Protect Cape Cod coalition with Housing Assistance Corporation and the Cape and Islands Association of Realtors. But the lane that the chamber has chosen is that missing middle, because the affordable housing stuff is a definition, a state definition based on AMI, and it's really complicated to finance those deals. You have to use new market tax credits and other things like that. So we're focused on the missing middle, and we're focused on if there were a regional housing trust that could buy deed restrictions for year-round properties. Vail, Colorado has a program. I mean, they're a much smaller community, but it's had some unintended consequences over there that I think that are positive. It's become a first-time home buyers program because they offer like $70,000 if you deed restrict your property so that you can only sell it to year-round residents. And a lot of people will go in to purchase a home. They'll sign over the deed at the closing, and then that's another $70,000 they can put down as a down payment. Very interested in that program and its scalability Cape-wide. Also very interested in talking to the state about state-owned property or potentially municipally owned property that you might want to put out for like a 99-year lease for $1 to a developer. It's going to build the kind of housing you want, right? And then deed restrict those properties for year-round residents. I think there are also sort of tax credit situations where if you have a second homeowner that is going to rent year-round instead of on a weekly basis, maybe give them a tax credit. Because right now, if you do the math, it's generally less than 3 months of weekly short-term rental sales, you can generate what you would in a year round.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things I think that can make a difference. We also need to look at density, appropriate density, in appropriate places. And we can do it, other communities do it. It's just density is a difficult discussion to have publicly because it's just, when you talk about the number of units, people see big block monoliths, and developers, that's the least expensive thing to build, right, in many respects. So, I think we have to find a better way to have discussions about density and what's appropriate density. We're also working with a not-for-profit called Incremental Development, or IncDev, and we hope to bring them in next year. What they do is they'll go into communities, they will select a cohort of like 8 to 10 people that already live in the communities, and they'll train them how to be lower scale developers, how to like turn commercial properties into residential properties.
What was the name of that again?
IncDev. And so they have a concept called gentle density, which I think would really be appropriate on the Cape. And you're using local people in a local system. They're not outside developers. So, I think we have to try everything. These are things I think that make sense, and we might be able to get the ball rolling now. Even the Bank of America building that opened on 132, right? So you closed the branch on West Main Street and on Barnstable Road. I think IncDev would look at those kind of buildings for like, how do we turn that into housing?
Sure.
On a lower scale.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful ideas. Enjoyed the PowerPoint. Thank you.
All right, finishing the right side, we'll go with Amanda.
I have a few questions. I'm going to try to gather my thoughts. One, I did want to comment on the fact that I think this spring was really tough for a lot of our local businesses, and I do think a lot of locals were actually traveling as well. So that's something to keep in mind, too, is that we have locals that need to also support our local economy. But we heard from every sector that they had a really, really tough spring. But what I did find on that sort of note, it was really interesting to look at the first weekend of December to see that Barnstable is pretty uniquely positioned to attract visitors from other parts of the Cape.
Yep.
And that's something that we can definitely, I think, capitalize on. And also it's like, why were those Boston people going to Mashpee? They should have been at the Love Local Fest. But that was really interesting to see. And so that's an opportunity for us to kind of look at Boston and see how can we get them to come to us during the holiday season. And I kind of want to focus our discussion a little bit on more of Barnstable's strengths and like specifically to us. And in this economic picture, I know that's a really broad question, but maybe we could start specifically with the blue economy. It's a buzzword, everyone talks about it, but, and I think Barnstable, we're trying to find our spot in that discussion because it feels like potentially, Chatham has like the fishing and Huey has the science or Woods Hole and Falmouth have the science. And so where can Barnstable really amplify and grow what the strengths that we have here? Specifically in the blue economy, but also I think in other, like in your opinion, you are so intimately familiar with this town and the strengths and opportunities. So I would love to hear about that.
I mean, it's a great town. Mm-hmm. It has you have a lot going for you. And I think a lot of times you hear just negativity, but there are probably, 340 communities that would rather be Barnstable in the state. It's a large community, so you're the fourth largest municipal landmass. You have 7 really distinct villages. I mean, what I find unique about Barnstable is every part of the Cape is a little bit different, but you can find all of those pieces in Barnstable, right? Whether it's Sandy Neck or Craigville Beach or downtown Hyannis Main Street. Like, it's all here. So I think Barnstable itself is more representative of the entire Cape than any other single town. And I think that is a huge strength. You also have a $200 million budget. And you have basically a city form of government, which allows you to act more expediently than the town meeting process in a lot of other towns. These are all tremendous advantages moving forward. And I had a phone call with the Boston Globe today on another matter, but and they were saying their impression was that the lower and really the outer Cape is more the draw for tourism. But that's not really the case. I mean, it really starts, Falmouth and Barnstable have strong draws as well on the upper Cape. But the advantage that you have over the outer Cape is you have much more of a year-round economy here to grow. So whether it's the blue economy, looking, we had our big blue conference last year at the MMA, and one of the most popular panels was your town manager, Mark Ells, and the owner of the Naked Oyster, and people from ARC, right? That shows you. We grow the spat for the oysters in Dennis. The town gives a grant to the local restaurant in Barnstable Harbor, and they serve the oysters on Main Street, right? That's blue. That's the blue economy. And I think there are tremendous opportunities for Barnstable there. But you also have Cape Cod Healthcare, who's here, major industry. So I think there are tremendous advantages. Main Street's always been the topic of discussion. There's a lot of opportunity on Main Street. But if you say no to everything, you get derelict properties that have been, historic buildings that have been empty for over 25 years.
Yep.
Right? Absentee landlords. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to be aggressive, I think, around that stuff. I mean, if I were in Barnstable, I'd be looking at a redevelopment authority on Main Street. Because I think that's where you can clean up a lot of the title to the property and get grocery stores down, have a more living Main Street, right? That's what I see as a tremendous advantage to having people that actually live on Main Street. You'll have much more dynamic business representation. I mean, when you start to see, dry cleaners and barbershops and stuff like that, you have a healthy Main Street. When you start to see real estate offices, you don't. I mean, that's just the reality. And the planning department has made great strides on Main Street. Would like to see that continue. I think that's an advantage. Part of the concern I have, if we don't embrace that, I mean, and it is change. Nobody likes change. And everybody's unsure. But, there are ways to do it right. I went at the commission for 10 years, that's what we did. We took projects in, and we tried to make them better. And I think we had a lot of success doing that. But if you look at where a lot of the residential development is happening in Barnstable, now it's happening in the industrial park.
Yep.
Right, with the Everlay development out there, the New England development, Hanover parcel that opened up. And why is your residential development happening in your industrial park? Industrial zoning is the loosest zoning that you have. You've got sewers out there, and you don't have any neighbors.
Yep.
But when you build that much density out there, you're going to have to extend services, right? Fire services, water services, other services, which means puts pressure on everybody's tax base. So it is more expensive to say, yeah, we'll let it go there because nobody's going to complain about it, than it is to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work of putting the housing where it's going to be most economically beneficial to your entire community and really add to the community character and the flavor of what is just a great community. Really, it's solid. And having people on Main Street, public safety will improve. I mean, there's just, that's really what you want to do.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I don't say that too often. I've actually learned a lot. Thank you for mentioning the blue economy and the potential damages that we are going to experience due to climate change. And thank you for also mentioning the fact that, we're building, I live on Independence, I'm a renter, and I moved here during the COVID pandemic. So I'm one of those who came and stayed during the pandemic, and I'm fighting for renters here on the Cape. So you mentioned that Independence is a good place to do housing. Where else do you think that we should be doing housing? That's one question. And I do want to say again, thank you for mentioning climate change. That is, to me, a big thing because the next generation who are here, which are those on the committee who have children, they want this area to be safe for their children as well, for their grandchildren. And if we don't worry about the climate change, we're not going to have the Cape whatsoever in order. And the more we build away from the water, I personally think the better, because we're not really impacting the water. So thank you again for your presentation, and thank you for mentioning climate change. I know there are people on this committee that don't believe in climate change and actually rolled their eyes when you said it, but I wanted to say I support everything you said. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And housing's going out to Independence Park. I'm not certain that's the best place for it to go, because I do think it's going to increase costs for all residents in the town of Barnstable. to have that happen. I think there are other places where housing makes sense. Main Street is one of them. I mean, Main Street used to be residential, right? And then it was both. It was a residential commercial mix. As soon as sort of federal highways came in and the malls went in, we decided we wanted to zone residential activity away from commercial activity.
There's
And-
nothing there in the winter.
And that sort of broke the system. There are also areas where, Barnstable went to a 2-acre zoning in the 80s to stop this sort of rapid
Overdevelopment.
residential single-family development that was happening that's caused the nitrogen problem and a lot of other problems now. But that was kind of a blunt instrument, You have on the north side of this town areas that probably could be zoned 4 or 5 acres, right? And that would be fine. But you have other places like maybe Centerville, for example, where you might want some infill, especially if you're going to be extending wastewater infrastructure out there, because the financing of wastewater infrastructure is pretty simple. The more users you have on the shortest length of pipe, the more sustainable and less expensive that system's going to be. 70% of your costs are in the distribution system.
And one more question for you. So yesterday, I know myself, I was out of power for about 6.5 hours off of Independence. So we're looking at things like that happening. What is the chamber doing to help with the internet, for example? Because I know that in the summertime, when you have all the tourists come on Main Street, no really good internet, things like that.
Yeah, and the state has about 150 million available for broadband right now. So we're sort of pushing them to do really a study, because if you talk to Comcast, they'll tell you there aren't that many homes that aren't hooked up. But that's not the only question. So I think we need sort of an independent analysis to see who's hooked up and who's not, and of those people that are hooked up, what level of service they really have, and try to figure it out that way. I think it's going to need some government intervention because you're dealing with a monopoly. So I think we have to look at that. That was a substation fire out on Mary Dunn Road yesterday. So Harwich and Nantucket felt some of it too. But that shows you how fragile the infrastructure is. So at the chamber, we're looking at, where's the offshore wind energy going to go? And we're starting to get complaints on a regular basis now from people that are visiting in the summer that there aren't enough electric vehicle charging stations, for example. But whether you're putting power into the grid or taking it out, the grid as it's currently constituted isn't ready for it. So I did have an opportunity I was at a ribbon cutting in Sandwich last week at a major substation that Eversource just opened up. And that's all about trying to create that resiliency and that redundancy and to be able to build the grid of the future. So I'm hopeful that we're already making those steps on the infrastructure side there. And then on the climate change stuff, I don't know what to say to people that don't believe that it's happening. I think it's an economic imperative. And I think it's the biggest threat to property tax owners is that shift in property tax that's going to happen if coastal property values start to dip.
Thanks. Anyone else? You guys done?
I'm curious about your position on the development on Independence Park, the Hanover, Hyannis, Chevrolet, and all of that. I feel like, I personally am kind of resigned to that development's going to happen there. And my understanding is New England Development is basically ready to build another Hanover of Hyannis. I agree that Main Street, Hyannis, needs residents. I kind of want to live here when you get me, when there's an apartment. And I don't really want to live in Hanover of Hyannis ever. But, it's happening. And
It is.
I live in Barnstable Village, so I know about the fire and the water and all that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's a negative thing. I just think that it's an easy thing from when you're talking about town-wide planning efforts to let it go to a place that doesn't have neighbors that are going to complain, that have sewers and has really sort of liberal zoning. I think there are better choices that can be made. So we need the housing. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But I think if you're just going to put density out in the park, that's going to look very different in 20 years, and it's going to have a tremendous impact on the rest of the town. So I think part of your challenge as a local comprehensive planning committee is to look at, how much housing do you want out there? How are you going to judge how many units out there before you have to start to extend additional services out there? How much the services are going to cost? Where might some infill development actually help and make some of the infrastructure more sustainable long-term? And it's really, if the town can paint that picture for the developers, you're less likely to have developers come in on marginal properties and try to build things that aren't appropriate on those parcels. But you have to give them guidance. You have to show them where the most important thing you can do, I think, in a local comprehensive plan is to tell people where you want housing built, what kind of housing you want there.
Great, thanks. That's it for questions from us. Anyone from the audience have a question? There's not many of you. Sure, come on down.
Thank you, Paul. I learned a lot from what you had to say. I've been noticing this particular season a lot more with the inflation. It's been it's been tough just to go to the grocery store for people. You see scenes that you don't normally used to see in the grocery store, where people having a hard time making ends meet. I'm seeing strip malls that are empty on West Main Street. You go down Route 28, you see a lot of dilapidated, empty buildings. My daughter came to visit me from New York. She actually flew from New York to Cape Cod for a little vacation. And it was more noticeable that we're struggling. It's been a painful season, as you had brought up. I'd like to see more incentive for the kind of business, like I know when in Brockton, when they sold the fairgrounds, there was a lot of talk about making an industrial park, the kind of a park where there's work, there's income. That's also part of it. I mean, there's a lot that we have to consider. It's not just housing, it's the health of the community. We have to, it's a delicate. And it's a tough time we're going through as we work our way through this. We want to see a health, restore our community to the health that we'd like to see it. It's sad to see dilapidated, it'd be nice if we could, have an incentive for repurposing buildings that are tired looking. That's sad to drive by and see, boy, at one time that was a nice place to live, but it's kind of run down. If there was some type of incentive to help these residential communities be upgraded so that we have a little more pride in our town for our people. I don't know. It's just a thought. Thank you.
I guess we'll take a couple of minute break and then regroup at the back of the room for our workshop part of the meeting, if that's okay. All right, everyone.
So you're making about it.
We're ready. Okay, we've got everyone back. We'll reconvene our meeting and hear from Elizabeth Jenkins regarding our breakout group.
Thank you. I'm going to do a real quick report out on the discussions we had regarding economic development, starting with Cultural Center. Key strategies were increase the density of cultural events and find a way to add more diversity into those events, celebrate the diversity of our community through foods, arts, culture, promote a large indoor venue that will facilitate year-round events, and find ways to support large landmark events like the Fire Water Festival in Providence, as well as landmark public arts. Find an organization or be the organization as the town of Barnstable to bring it all together in terms of the cultural sector with a focus on communication and marketing, expand on that opportunity around Arts Barnstable, someone to be the center of gravity and also to be inclusive of all groups in our communities who are holding events. But also the idea is that arts often start at the top, and then there's some trickle down into the community that creates that diversity. We talked about streamlining processes to permit special events, food trucks, etc. Ideas for artist competitions and juried art shows as part of other events to activate that cultural community. And again, collaboration, collective marketing being key. We talked about diversifying healthcare options and access to healthcare, especially things like walk-in clinics, preventative care at a smaller scale, not just at the Cape Cod Hospital, working collaboratively with smaller organizations to understand their barriers, amending zoning to make sure we're allowing for shorter leases for traveling, visiting nurses around those facilities. Around economic centers, we talked about communication and convening opportunities for immigrant communities and making sure that we're communicating job training opportunities in multiple languages. We talked about our town communications, our website being more user-friendly, more happy, delivering more of what people are looking for from government. We talked about collaboration with the schools, getting more involved with the public schools and communicating with them our community's economic needs and job opportunities. We talked about cross-cultural language learning opportunities within our schools as well, and also bringing the schools in here to talk about what they're doing in their classrooms already around future visioning. Much like last time, we talked about four-year programming, especially focused around blue economy issues, marine technology, climate resilience, in partnership with the Cape Cod Community College. This idea that applied programs like the tech are doing are going to be a big part of our workforce training piece in the future. Around recreation, we talked about the importance of the Cape Cod Rail Trail and the idea of developing indoor facilities as well, courts, fields, indoor aquatic facilities. Around infrastructure, we talked about the need for grid resiliency. Under the category of zoning and regulatory, big focus on permit coordination, someone to be a champion or an advocate for small businesses through the process, cultural change in government to be there to help businesses and to develop policies with small businesses and local businesses in mind. So please feel free if I missed anything. I know we had some more reporting out that Kyle did directly on the sheets, but those were the highlights that I wrote down. Thank you.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to do that. So we'll get those comments posted up as soon as possible, and we can all review them I think sitting as a group in total was good. I think maybe not having the two groups save us a little time. So we'll look to do that. Next item on the agenda is general correspondence. We received a lot of emails, communications over enhancing our engagement process, perhaps larger joint meetings where we invite strictly public comment, not have a workshop of any kind. So we'll be working with staff to look at what that might be in the coming months. I know we're scheduled to go back out to the villages in September, but I think we need to look at perhaps some larger meetings, maybe in this room or some other room where we can invite a large number of groups, village associations, various types of groups like that to get one-night input perhaps. The next meeting will be June 27th at 5:30 p.m. here in the James Crocker hearing room, and we'll continue on with our work as we move forward. I don't know if we have any matters reasonably unexpected by the chair. I don't believe so.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
And it's maybe from the town. Are we, is there a drop dead date by which we need this plan done? Okay.
The answer was no. We're working on it. We've heard probably another year is going to be our work. Because we will have to go back to the planning board, then back to the town council, and if they want to make changes, we would have to look at that. So hopefully it won't take more than a year, but again, we'll be dependent upon public input going forward with the final version.
Okay.
Before we make a firm deadline.
Okay. So there are no programs that are at jeopardy for us not having this in place? Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn.
It's all right. Moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank
Opposed?
you.
Thank you very much.